Jan Ozer here from Mile High. I'm here with one of my personal compression heroes, David Ronca from Meta. Hi, David.
Hey, how's it going, Jan?
I'm good. We know David from his time at Meta and also from his time at Netflix, where he was instrumental to everything from per title encoding to the initiation of VMAF with his team. Of course, I'm sure he'll give them all the credit. But and amazingly, they told the story to everybody, so we all learned how to use it, and they open sourced everything, so we got to use it as well. So the industry is grateful to the work that David's done and his team has done, and it's always a pleasure to sit down with them. So we're here at Mile High. David, what are you speaking about at Mile High?
So today I shared some of the work we've been doing to bring AV1 into the Android ecosystem, actually into the mobile ecosystem, but obviously it's a more challenging problem for Android devices. And that's involved a lot of benchmarking, a lot of work to understand the capabilities of the devices, where we can and can't deliver AV1, and because we always need to do it in ensuring that we don't give users a bad experience. So we've spent a lot of time in that benchmarking, and then through that we've actually developed a tool to make future benchmarking easier. And so we came to talk about both the results of our benchmarking test plus this new tool that we call VCAT, that stands for Video Codec Acid Test, which is a tool specifically for benchmarking hardware and software decoders on Android devices.
Okay, so you started off your talk with a lot of interesting statistics about how much you're deploying AV1 today and how you see it playing out in your ecosystem over the next couple of years. So why don't you go into that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, the TLDR is we just crossed 50% of video watch in our ecosystem, in the Meta family of apps ecosystem is now AV1. And we've set a goal for the year for that to be above 60%. And we believe that we can get it up to around 90% by January 2028.
Okay, and the big problem is we kind of spoke about a moment ago with AV1. I mean, we all predicted that there would be AV1 decode in mobile phones by 2020, and between the pandemic and the shipping issues we had, that didn't happen, and then the slower than expected upgrade cycle as well. So a lot of people have been reluctant to deploy AV1 because of the software decode issue, and that's what you're trying to address with your tool.
Yeah, of course we all want hardware, right? And I'll just tell a little story. Back in my time at Netflix, when we were working on AV1 and contributing, I had a big disagreement with an executive, and he was saying, oh, by 2020, we're going to have AV1 hardware decoders everywhere. And I was like, you're wrong. 2022 at the earliest, right? And so here we are as 2025, and maybe 10% of the Android ecosystem has hardware AV1 decoders. And the reality is just from an economic perspective, when you're selling an $80 phone, there's just not a lot of margin in that to put a bunch more transistors in the SoC so that you have a hardware decoder. So that's kind of forced us to rethink this, and that's where we've leaned into software decoding. And we've been making investments in software decoding from several ways. We've invested and talked about the work we've done for decode-friendly encoder recipes. You can actually reduce the complexity of decoding by making some better, more intelligent decisions on the encoder side without paying a price for efficiency or quality. But now we're also looking, as we reach into the Android ecosystem, we want to be able to get as many Android devices as possible into the AV1 pool, and that required us to do significant benchmarking and understanding of what these devices can and cannot do, which ones we could target for AV1 and which ones we had to make sure we did not target for AV1.
And did Ryan, he talked about that when he wrote his piece on SVT AV1 and Reels. Was this, he talked about benchmarking back then. I don't know if you saw the paper.
So you're talking about the original paper a few years ago? So more recently at this past DMUX, Ryan talked about the decoder-friendly work that we're doing.
I did not say that.
Okay, and in that case showed where we've actually reduced the decode complexity by about 25%. We've done this in collaboration with Intel in SVT AV1 by making some better decision making and more careful thought about how we use the various tools. We've been able to reduce the decode complexity by about 25%. That came at about a 3 to 5% hit in quality, but when we deployed this, we simply used the next slower speed, so we bought that quality back with a little bit more compute. So that's the one thing we've done, but having that at the end of the day, so we can prove, like in our benchmarking tests in the lab, that we're saving bits or saving compute, but at the end of the day, it's all about battery. And so we need to see that work resulting in longer battery life, and that's kind of what gave rise to the benchmarking we've done now, which has all been about battery life. We're running decode tests on Android devices, long-running battery drain tests, and we're monitoring and tracking the battery. And it was that work, and it's a very difficult test because they run 16, we want at least 16 hours of continuous playback. These phones now can get 20, 22, 24 hours of drain. So we realized that in order to do this level of benchmarking, we needed a tool to do this, and hence the investment in VCAT.
Okay, so what does this tool allow me as a publisher to do?
So, I mean, the purpose or the vision we have for VCAT is because we believe, so if you think about the video distribution system, and I'm thinking about mobile, so you have the network operators who are managing bandwidth and the bandwidth and network congestion. You have the content access provider or CAPs like Meta, Netflix, others, who are businesses built around delivering video. You have handset vendors, you have SoC vendors, and we're all working on systems, and nowhere in there is anybody doing any testing or benchmarking to understand how these are going to be able to support like the work that we're doing. And in this case, getting AV1 out, and again, I talk about AV1, but it's a similar problem for VVC, where the hardware decode deployment cycle is going to be very long, right? We're used to short cycles from past codecs, but now the economics of the Android ecosystem don't support rapid refresh. So we're going to have to look at software. And in order to look at software, we need to be able to look at these devices from their ability to support software. And by the way, they're getting very powerful. The modern ARM CPUs running as Androids, all the advances in technology, they're making them very, very capable devices. But nevertheless, we need to be able to measure that and understand that. So the VCAT tool, we believe the most benefit here is it would allow, for example, network operators to, when they're looking at phones, they could actually benchmark them and to determine how well they could support their given codec from a software or hardware perspective. What's the battery life going to look like? For the handset vendors, if they're looking at SoC reference designs, they could also benchmark there. And the SoC also, as they're looking at their next generation of chips, they could run benchmarks. So we think that a tool like this is going to allow the ecosystem from SoC all the way to the network operators and the CAPs to all have a better understanding of the devices, because we really think that is essential to moving us forward. And then, by the way, right now it's a company like Meta has the resources for this. But if this analysis and benchmarking is being done broadly, then all the smaller companies would be able to leverage that work as well, because the devices themselves would be benchmarked and rated, for example, possibly rated on battery life or whatever. So you could know that you could safely deliver AV1 to a device without having to worry about battery or thermal or any other problems.
So is this going to, if I'm a publisher and I have AV1, am I going to distribute a different stream to different classes of devices, or am I going to send AVC to some devices? And I mean, what decisions can I make at the streaming point to kind of leverage this?
So and that's a good question, and it's something I talk about often. That right, the more codecs you support, the more expensive your system is, right? And I always make that point. You start with AVC. If you put HEVC on top of that, let's say it's 40% fewer bits, but you're not reducing your bits at the edge, your cache costs and distribution costs by 40%, you're increasing them by 60%, right? Because now you still have the AVC, now you have HEVC. And if you put AV1 on top of it, so ideally we want to get to a place where perhaps everybody has a legacy experience and then maybe one codec. That's where we want to be. We want to have one codec. When we get at 90%, we're literally saying, like, our users, unless you're in a legacy experience, you would have AV1. That would be what you would get. And so I think for publishers of any type, that would be the ideal, right? Do we get there? I don't know, but having like N codecs, where N gets bigger and bigger every generation, I think it just gets really, you have to encode more videos, you have to push more videos through your network, you got to pay all that transit, you got to store more at the edge, and so it just gets really complicated. So hopefully, what we'd like to see is the newer codecs replacing the older codecs, not just constantly have this growing. Right, we just get more and more complicated. So the fact that you have to think today, should I do H.264 or HEVC or VP9 or AV1 or it just gets too complicated. So ideally, you may have like, this is our experience, and then here's legacy for like these long tail devices. And again, when we say 90% in 2028. that doesn't mean 10% of the devices are going to have a long tail experience or a legacy experience. That's actually most of the devices. We believe more than 90% of devices will be able to support AV1 at that point. And that 10% for us is not legacy devices. That's just everything else we do, right? Because we do a lot of things that are like, they're never going to be AV1. They're always going to be H.264. Right?
Okay. And what is this, take this at a bigger scale and relate it to newer codecs, not only VVC, but the work being done with H.267. I mean, you're basically saying the world's not going to, and you're not making any proclamations, I am, but the world's not going to support another codec that requires hardware decode? Is that just never going to make it in mobile is kind of your view?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I think what you have to understand is you've got, if you look at mobile devices, you've got $1,000 devices, you've got $500 devices, $300 devices, and $80 devices. And $1,000 devices can support encodecs, right? Because there's a lot of margin in the, though I'm not an expert, I would think there's a lot of margin in there to bring a new codec into the SoC. $80, not so much, right? And when you're doing a global service, right? I mean, as I shared today, maybe 10% of shipping devices today would be considered premium, would be up at high enough to have hardware AV1 decoding, and 90% don't. And we're hopeful that within 2 or 3 years, maybe 20 to 30% of shipping devices would have hardware AV1, but still, we could easily be waiting 10 years. So I'm not saying the hardware won't be there. I'm simply saying it's going to be much, much longer deployment cycles than what we're used to, right? Our experience was we did H.264, HEVC shipped in 2013, 2014, and within 5 years, almost 100% of Android devices had HEVC hardware decoder. And so we figure, okay, now AV1, 5 more years, and VVC, 5 more years, but that's simply not the case. And that's because the margins are continuing to get pushed down and squeezed, and there's just not room in those low-end devices to bring that kind of cost in. So it can take many, many, many years for that technology to trickle down from the most expensive SoCs down into the cheapest ones.
Okay. Any difference with this as it relates to live versus VOD?
I don't think so. Now, I'm mostly a VOD person, but I mean, if you can decode successfully, you can decode successfully.
I was thinking more on the encode side. I mean, that's where the difference is going to be in terms of, can you originate AV1 affordably for live as you can for VOD?
I think the answer would be yes. And again, I'll get back to SVT AV1, where we've invested so much time and money. I say we, that's several companies have invested, primarily Intel, but also Netflix has invested and Meta has invested. And if you look at the cost, so SVT AV1 can encode a video at the same computational complexity as X264 very fast and reduce the bits by about 40%. Okay. Or you can go all the way over to SVT AV1 speed 1, which is about 100 times slower, and it's reducing the bits by, I don't remember the number, at that point it's about 30% better than HEVC. And you've got that, so you can use AV1 efficiently for a use case from starting X264 very fast all the way into very slow configurations. But if you were doing live, for example, you would need to have most of your clients able to decode AV1, right? Because otherwise you'd have to have 2, right? Which is, I think, it's easier to have multiple encodes for a non-live experience. Yeah. But when you get to a live experience, I mean, are you going to do 3 simultaneous encodes, HEVC, AVC, and AV1? I don't know. That sounds very complicated and expensive to me, and I haven't seen anybody doing it. So I think live would probably would lag VOD when 60, 80%, 90% of VOD watch is an AV1, then certainly live could follow. Okay. But I'll leave that to the people who stress over live every day. That's not really my wheelhouse.
Okay. So this is, Mile High is a pretty specialized show. It's great that you came. What do you see in shows like Demuxed and Mile High that make you want to invest your time and Meta's money to get you here?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. So, I mean, the video community, we're a small and deep, what I would call is a deep, narrow expert field. And we're critical. I mean, most internet activity today is video, right? Without us, but we're not a large community and it's really important for us to get together and share experiences, share learnings. I've long believed in that. You know, that was the approach Netflix we took when I was at Netflix. Netflix still takes that. They were here sharing this week, and the same thing at Meta. We feel very much that way, as do you know, some of our other partners, Google and others. We all believe that the right way to move the video ecosystem forward, it's events like Mile High Video, it's events like DMX, and these places where we can get together, share our learnings, share our experiences, and kind of help each other. You know, as they say, the rising ocean lifts all the boats, or rising water. So we all kind of pool our learnings, pool our resources, and share our knowledge, and I think it's very useful.
Okay. Well, on that note, I think it's cocktail hour, so I'll let you go.
Cocktails.
And
yes.
thank you for taking the time to meet with us today.
Oh, thank you so much. Good talking to you.